The ground shook as the queen entered, her armored steps echoing through the crystal throne hall. She was 8 feet tall, with golden skin that shimmered like metal. Her eyes glowing violet, her face proud and sharp, like it had never known fear. Around her, alien nobles stood silently, their heads bowed low as she passed behind her. 2 guards dragged a man in chains. A human, small in size compared to them, but not weak. His back was straight. His head was high, and though his hands were tied, his eyes held a strange calm. The queen sat on her high throne, carved from black stone, and looked down at him with a cold smile. "Name," she ordered, her voice like thunder. The man said softly, "Call me Eli." The nobles laughed. Even the guards smirked, but the queen didn't. She narrowed her eyes, her fingers tapping the arm of her throne. "You were caught inside restricted territory," she said, "spying on a queen's lands. What was your purpose?" Eli looked around the massive hall, filled with towering aliens with shimmering skin, sharp armor, and cold faces. He spoke gently. "I was just trying to survive." Laughter again, cruel and loud, echoed through the chamber. The queen tilted her head, amused. "And this survival leads you to sneak into my sacred garden past my guards during a sacred moon?" "I didn't know," Eli said, "but when I saw the trees, the stars, the silence, I thought maybe I could rest." The queen rose slowly from her throne, walking toward him step by step, her long cape trailing behind like a wave. She stopped, just inches from him, towering over his face. She leaned down, her glowing eyes searching his expression. "You should be begging now," she said quietly. "Most men do." Eli didn't blink, didn't step back. He said softly, "Do you beg? When you're tired of being alone?" A silence fell across the hall. The nobles stopped breathing. Even the guards holding Eli stiffened, unsure what they just heard. The queen stared at him for a long moment, then straightened. She turned back toward her throne but didn't sit. "Leave." "U.S.," she commanded. The hall emptied within seconds, armor clanking, whispers flying, until only she and Eli remained. She didn't look at him, not at first, but her voice was quieter now. "You should be dead." Eli nodded. "I thought so too, but you said something strange," she whispered, turning to face him again. "Why would you say that?" Eli shrugged a little. "You looked lonely." The queen's mouth tightened, as if she wanted to deny it, but couldn't. "No one speaks to me like that," she said, almost to herself, not even other queens. He gave a soft smile. "Maybe they should." Another pause. Then, to his shock, she reached forward and touched the chains with a wave of her hand. They unlocked and dropped to the floor. Eli stood still, rubbing his wrists, surprised by the sudden freedom. "Why?" he asked, truly confused. The queen turned away, walking back to her throne, her steps slower this time. "You're not free," she said, "but you are mine now." Eli blinked. "What does that mean?" She looked over her shoulder, her voice firm. "You will stay in my palace under guard, fed, and protected, but you will speak only to me." "Why me?" he asked again. She sat down, her violet eyes locking onto his. "Because," she said, in one sentence, "you made me feel something I haven't felt in centuries." Eli didn't know what to say. He was just trying to survive, to rest for one night under a quiet sky. But now, he had the attention of an alien queen, a woman feared across 100 worlds. And deep inside her powerful presence, he saw a crack, a quiet ache she tried so hard to hide. He didn't kneel, didn't bow. He simply said, "All right," and waited for what would come next. Far above them, the stars shifted, and the moon's shadow began to stretch across the sky. Something ancient was beginning to move, something no one expected, not even the queen herself. The sun had long set, but the queen did not sleep. She stood alone at the edge of her private tower balcony, staring at the stars. Below her, the palace was silent, guarded, and still. But her mind was restless, her thoughts circling one name. Eli, the human she should have executed, the man who spoke. As if he saw through her, and now, instead of sleeping in a dungeon, he was resting in one of the guest chambers, small, yes, but warm and soft. She hadn't told anyone why, not even her trusted advisors. How could she? How could she explain that one sentence from a human had reached a place inside her she didn't know still existed? Her species didn't speak of feeling. They were bred for strength, dominance, rule. But now she kept replaying his voice. Do you beg when you're tired of being alone? The words echoed louder than any battlefield cry. She turned and walked down the hall, her long robe whispering behind her. Guards straightened, but she gave no orders. They opened the door without question, and she stepped inside Eli's chamber. He was awake, sitting on the floor near the window, watching the stars. He didn't jump when she entered, didn't bow, didn't flinch. He just looked at her and said softly, "Couldn't sleep either." The queen didn't answer right away. She studied him, his small frame, simple clothes, his calm face. So humans look to the stars too? She asked, her voice lower now, without the force she used in court. Eli smiled. We dream of what's out there. We imagine it's more than war and rules. She stepped closer, slowly, as if unsure of her own feet. What did you dream of? She asked, folding her arms. He looked thoughtful, of being heard, being seen, being understood. Even if just once, she blinked, her tall figure casting a shadow over him. And you think I don't understand that? Eli raised an eyebrow. You rule 100 systems. They say you crushed rebellions without mercy. Do you really think people see you? Or do they only fear you? The room went still. She opened her mouth to speak, but no answer came. No one had ever dared to ask her that, not her generals, not her servants, not even the queens of allied planets. But this human, sitting quietly beside a window, had just pulled the mask from her face with simple words. You speak boldly, she said finally, but there was no anger, only curiosity. Eli nodded. Where I come from? Boldness is all the weak have. She looked at the stars again, then said, Tell me of your world. And he did. He told her of oceans that roared like lions, of forests that whispered secrets in the wind, of music, laughter, of children running barefoot, of mothers humming lullabies, things her world had lost long ago. If it ever had them, she sat down across from him, silent, listening. Her armor glowed faintly in the dim light. But for once, it felt like just metal, not power, not pride, just a shell. I've never heard stories like that, she said quietly. We were taught to erase the past, not celebrate it. Eli leaned back. Then maybe it's time someone told you? A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, unfamiliar and frightening. She had crushed warlords, broken fleets, outlasted assassins. But this quiet human with kind eyes was doing something none of them could. He was making her feel safe. She stood suddenly, trying to shake the feeling. You will remain under watch, she said, her voice stronger now. But I will return, Eli smiled up at her. You don't have to be alone every night, you know? Her breath caught just a little before she turned away. I don't get lonely, she said quickly, and walked out before he could reply, but her steps were slower, her heart unsteady, outside. The guards exchanged confused glances as she passed. The queen didn't speak to anyone that night, but as she lay in her bed, for the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely cold. She didn't know what this was, this growing need to return to that room, but something ancient had stirred inside her. Not hunger, not desire for power, something gentler, something dangerous, curiosity, and in her long reign that had never ended well. The palace was never truly quiet, even at night. whispers floated through the silver halls like ghosts. Guards spoke softly behind their helmets. Servants paused longer near doors. Advisors traded glances instead of words. Something was happening. Something no one could explain. The queen, who once ruled with fire in her eyes and steel in her voice, now visited a human every night. A man too small to challenge her, too soft to intimidate. He was still alive. Not only alive, but seated in comfort, fed with royal food, spoken to like an equal. Rumors spread like wildfire. She goes to his chamber in secret. They speak for hours. She laughs with him. No one had seen her laugh in years. Some claimed he was a spy. Others whispered dark magic, and a few just a few began to wonder if it was something worse. Affection among them, one voice rose louder than the rest: Warlord Varnak. A towering alien with skin like cracked stone and scars from a dozen battles. He had once asked for the queen's hand in union, and she had refused with only 3 words. You bore me. Now his eyes burned with jealousy and rage. She lets the human pollute her mind. He growled in council. She is weakening. We must act. The nobles listened, but hesitated. No one wanted to challenge the queen directly, not yet. But in their silence, Varnak found fuel for rebellion. Meanwhile, in the royal gardens, under the pale glow of twin moons, the queen walked beside Eli. Once again, she had ordered the guards to stay far back. Claiming she wanted air, Eli wore a dark cloak given by her handmaiden Zid was too big. But warm, he smiled as he looked up at the glowing trees, their branches dancing with soft light. This place is beautiful, he said gently, but it feels sad too. The queen raised an eyebrow. Sad? Eli nodded. Like everything here is pretending to be alive. But it's tired. She looked at the trees for the first time in years. Really looked, and she saw what he meant. These trees were planted centuries ago, she said, her voice quieter than usual, but none have bloomed in decades. Maybe they need something different, Eli said. Light, music. Maybe someone who still believes they can bloom again. The queen stared at him, unsure why those simple words made her chest ache. She walked ahead in silence, but her steps slowed, waiting for him to catch up. The next day, servants noticed strange things. The queen ordered fresh flowers placed in the halls. She asked for soft music to play during meals. She even smiled once at a maid who dropped a triand helped her pick it up. By evening, half the palace believed the queen had gone mad. But none dared speak it aloud, except Varnak. He stormed into the queen's private war chamber without permission. My queen, this must stop, he declared, slamming his fist on the table. This infection the human brings, he weakens you. The queen turned slowly, her eyes colder than ice. Say that again, she said. Each word sharp. Varnak didn't flinch. You risk the strength of the crown for the whispers of a lesser species. She rose from her seat, her long robes flowing like a storm. You call him weak, she said, but he has stood before me without trembling. Something you have never done. Gasps echoed from the few advisors nearby. Varnak's face turned red with fury. This is betrayal. He snarled, to your people, to your legacy. The queen stepped closer, her face inches from his sleeve. She whispered, before I remember why I once thought you were dangerous. Varnak turned, seething, but said nothing more. Not yet. But war had already begun in his heart. That night, as the stars returned to the sky, the queen knocked softly on Eli's chamber door. He opened it. Surprised, you knocked this time. He said with a soft smile. She didn't smile back. Her face was tight, her voice low. They're starting to turn against me. Eli moved aside, letting her in because of me. Yes, she said, because I no longer scare them like I used to. She sat down slowly, rubbing her temples. Eli knelt in front of her. Maybe fear isn't the only way to rule. She looked at him, her eyes searching. Then what is? Respect, he said. Kindness, strength when needed, but heart when possible. She touched his hand lightly. The first time she reached for him, not the other way around. I don't know if I have a heart left, she whispered. Eli held her hand gently. Then we find it together, and outside, in the shadows. A spy watched through a crack in the stone and ran to tell Warlord Varnak what he had seen. Asterisk, the sky turned dark, though it was not yet night. People across the capital stopped and looked up. A shadow moved over the twin sun, slow and deep. The great eclipse had begun. It came once every 200 years. The old text said it was a time when fate itself could be changed, when oaths became eternal and moments carried across lifetimes. Inside the palace, the queen stood on her balcony. Her golden armor gone, replaced by a deep, violet robe trimmed with silver. She watched the dark circle crawl over the sun, her face unreadable, behind her. Eli stood quietly. Wearing ceremonial clothes the servants had shyly offered. He looked uncomfortable in them, but when he had stepped into the chamber, the queen had stared a little too long. Now, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't heavy, it was waiting. You asked me what this night means, she finally said, her voice soft. It's the oldest tradition of my people. Eli nodded. And what happens during it? The queen didn't turn around. Any two souls who touch during the deepest moment of the eclipse are said to be bound forever, beyond blood, beyond law. He paused. Is that a marriage thing? She closed her eyes slowly. It is not always romantic, but sometimes it is. Eli stepped beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. And do people still believe in this? She looked at him. Not many, she whispered. But I do. The eclipse darkened more, bathing the palace in soft silver and pale blue. Below them, torches flickered to life. Fires burned in sacred circles, and songs began to echo across the valley, yet the queen stayed still, her hand clenched, her jaw tight. I shouldn't have brought you here, she said suddenly. This is too dangerous. For who? Eli asked. Me or you? She looked at a man for the first time. Her eyes were afraid. Varnak is gathering power. The nobles are watching me, she said. They'll call me weak, unfit. And if I reach for your hand? Eli asked. She froze. They will. Call it treason, she whispered. And worse, they might be right. Eli turned to face her fully. You rule an empire, but when you talk to me, you sound like someone who just wants to be understood. She didn't speak, but her fingers twitched. He lifted his hand, slowly, not forcing, not asking, just offering. The eclipse reached its peak. The last sliver of light vanished behind the black disk in the sky. All was shadow. All was still. The queen looked at his hand, her breath shallow. And then gently, almost fearfully, she placed her fingers in his. A soft hum filled the air, like distant thunder or the whisper of stars. A glow spread where their hands touched, faint but real, down in the gardens. Gasps were heard. Guards watched in silence, unsure if they were witnessing love or rebellion. From the shadows, Varnak's spy ran again, his feet silent on stone. Inside the chamber, the queen had not moved. Her hand stayed in Eli's, and she looked down at the soft light between their palms. I've done many things, she whispered, but never something this fragile. Then let's not break it, Eli replied. She slowly nodded, her voice shaking. This changes everything. Maybe that's what we both needed, he said. And slowly, the light returned to the sky. The sun began to emerge again, but nothing in that palace would ever be the same. Later that night, as the stars blinked awake, the queen sat alone in the Hall of Memory. In her hands was a small artifact, an old relic from her ancestors. used only during sacred bonds. She traced her fingers over it. Her mind quiet but restless. Door opened behind her. It was her oldest advisor, her voice low and cautious. "My queen. Warlord Varnak has summoned the council," she said. "He demands your removal." The queen didn't look up. "Let him try," she said. "I've faced worse than a jealous fool." The advisor hesitated, and the human. The queen finally looked up, her voice clear. "He's not a prisoner anymore," she said. "He's under my protection." By bond, the advisor's eyes widened. But she bowed low, "As you command," and as the door closed behind her, the queen whispered one final thing to the stars outside. "Whatever happens next, I will not let him fall." It started with silence, the kind of silence that feels wrong, to still, to calm. Like the air itself was holding its breath. The queen had barely slept after the eclipse. Her mind kept repeating that moment when she had taken Eli's hand. And the stars had seemed to listen. She had done something no ruler had dared in centuries. She had chosen, not as a queen, but as a woman. But now, as the early light crept into her chambers, something felt off. There were no footsteps outside. Number guards, switching posts, the scent of morning incense was missing. A cold breeze slid through the cracks of the massive doors, and with it came dread. The queen stood quickly, her instincts sharp, her eyes glowing brighter. She didn't wait for her handmaids. She stormed down the hallway barefoot, her royal robe flowing behind her like shadowed fire. When she reached the throne hall, the doors were already wide open, and inside stood Warlord Varnak, fully armored. Around him stood half the royal guards, now wearing red crests instead of silver. They had switched sides. A coup had begun. "You're late, my queen," Varnak said with a smirk. "We were just deciding your future." Her voice was low and deadly. "You'll regret stepping into this hall with betrayal in your blood." He stepped forward confidently. "No, queen, you've already betrayed yourself. And your people?" He lifted a holographic projection, an image of her and Eli. Standing hand in hand during the eclipse, gasps filled the room, even among those who had not yet chosen a side. "She has bonded herself to a lesser being," Varnak shouted to a human. "She places emotion over duty, weakness over bloodline. This is treason of the throne." The queen stood tall, her voice calm. "You fear what you do not understand. You fear change, I fear extinction," Varnak growled. "And I will not let this empire die because of your soft heart." Then he raised his arm, and the rebel guards moved to attack. But the queen was already in motion. With one wave of her hand, her command rings lit up. Sending a signal through the palace, hidden walls opened. Elite royal defenders poured in loyal. Silent, deadly. Swords clashed, shields sparked, energy. Bolts tore through columns. The great hall became a battlefield. Meanwhile, Eli was in his chamber, confused by the sounds of war. He stepped outside and saw two guards sprinting past, then a third spotted him. There, a doom. The rebel shouted, raising his weapon. Eli ducked back into his room, but the door blasted open behind him. The guard entered, weapon pointed. "You're the reason she's fallen," he shouted. "You made her weak," before the weapon fired. A blur of motion knocked the guard sideways. It was Krevna, the queen's personal guard captain, a tall female warrior with scars and fury in her eyes. "You stay behind me," she said, grabbing Eli's wrist. She gave the order, "You are not to be harmed." Eli didn't argue. He followed her through secret halls as the battle raged above. Screams echoed, smoke drifted through cracks, and the sound of swords meeting metal grew louder. Back in the throne hall, the queen faced Varnak herself. Their weapons clashed his. Hammer against her twin blades, he was stronger, but she was faster, sharper, and filled with fire. "You think bonding with a human makes you less?" Varnak shouted as he attacked. "You've made yourself a joke." She spun past him, slashing his armor. "Then you clearly don't understand strength," she hissed. "It's not in blood. It's in choice," he roared and charged again. But this time her blade found the weak spot beneath his ribs. He collapsed to his knees, breath shallow, eyes wide. She knelt beside him. "You lost not because I changed, but because you never did." And then her blade dropped. She spared him. Because he deserved it. Because he needed to see the future rise without him. Eli and Krevna entered the hall moments later. He stopped when he saw the damaged broken stone. Blood on silver floors, rebels kneeling in defeat, and the queen standing tall. With fire behind her eyes, when she saw him, something in her expression softened. She walked toward him slowly, each step echoing louder than the last. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "No," he whispered. "Are you?" She shook her head, but tears, silent and glowing, slid down her cheek anyway. And then before the entire hall she reached for his hand again and held it tight. No one dared speak. Not even her enemies, because they all knew, in that moment. She wasn't just a queen anymore. She was something more. Something the Empire had never seen before, and the change had already begun. The throne room had never been this quiet, not even after a victory, not even during royal funerals. The wounded had been taken away, the rebels disarmed, and the fires put out, yet still, no one moved. Because the queen towering, proud, undefeated stood, hand in hand with a human, and no one understood what would happen next, not even her. She looked at Eli, his hand still in hers, blood stained the floor. Smoke curled around the shattered columns. But she only saw him. His eyes didn't ask for power, didn't demand anything. He simply stood with her. "I once thought I needed to be feared," she said softly. "Not just to him, to everyone. But now?" "I understand." She let go of his hand slowly and turned toward her people. Guards, nobles, servants, even children who had peeked from behind curtains all watched with wide eyes. Then, to the shock of every soul in the chamber, the queen knelt. Her massive frame dropped to one knee before Eli, her head lowered, her crown tilted forward. Gasps echoed through the hall like thunder. Even the loyal guard Krevna took a step forward, unsure if what she saw was real. Eli froze. "What are you doing?" he whispered. Her voice trembled but stayed strong. "In my world, kneeling has always meant surrender," she said, "but this is not surrender and shame. I kneel not because you conquered me," she continued. "I kneel because you reminded me I'm still alive." Eli's throat tightened. His heart pounding as the most powerful being in the galaxy knelt before him not as a ruler but as a woman. "I no longer wish to rule with fear," she said. "I want to build something new, with you beside me, not as property, not as symbol, but as choice." The nobles didn't know what to do. Some dropped to their knees, unsure if it was respect or survival. Others simply stared, their beliefs crumbling quietly inside them. Warlord Varnak, still alive but bound, watched in silent defeat. He had fought for the throne, but now it was the human everyone bowed to. Eli stepped forward slowly, his hands shaking. He gently lifted her face, looked into those glowing violet eyes and said softly, "I don't want your empire." She smiled faintly. "Then help me rebuild it." Later that day, the queen called for a public gathering. Thousands gathered in the grand amphitheater. Many, still bandaged from the uprising ships, hovered above, broadcasting her voice to every corner of the system. The queen stood before her people, not in armor, but in simple royal cloth. Eli stood behind her, quiet but present. "I have ruled for a long time," she said to the galaxy, "but I have made a mistake." She didn't sound weak, she sounded true. "I thought power came from control, from fear, but I was wrong. I met a man from a distant world, she continued, her voice clear. He reminded me that strength comes from connection, not domination. A murmur spread through the crowd. Shock, confusion, curiosity. Some nodded, others frowned, but no one dared look away. I do not ask you to accept him, because he is mine, she said, gesturing to Eli. I ask you to watch what happens when a queen chooses to listen, to feel, to change. She stepped aside, letting Eli take a step forward. He didn't give a speech. He just raised his hand and said gently, I didn't come here to rule. I came here to live. Then he added, but if you'll let me, I'll walk beside your queen. Not above her, not below her. And in that moment, something shifted. Not just in the air, not just in the crowd, but deep inside the hearts of a people who had forgotten what hope felt like. They didn't cheer wildly, not yet, but one by one hands rose, heads bowed, and the people accepted what had once been unthinkable. A human and a queen, not bound by force but by trust, that night in the queen's private garden. She and Eli sat beneath the stars. She leaned against his shoulder. No guards, no armor, no crown. You made me kneel, she whispered with a smile. Eli chuckled. You did that yourself. She looked up at him, her eyes warm. Then stand with me tomorrow, and every day after. He nodded. As long as you keep telling the truth. She smiled wider. Then I'll tell you a secret. What is it? He asked. I wasn't afraid of losing power, she said softly. I was afraid of being seen. And you saw me. Eli didn't speak. He just held her hand again. Not for the crowd, not for history, just for her. And this time, no stars. No crown, no throne stood between them. Only truth. A new day rose over the capital, but it was not like any day before. The flags that flew from the palace towers were no longer dark with gold. They were white, threaded with silver and blue, a symbol of change, for the first time in living memory. The people woke not to horns of command, but to gentle chimes echoing across the city. Merchants opened stalls early. Curious nobles peeked from balconies. Children ran barefoot in gardens once locked by guards. The empire felt different inside the royal court. The queen stood at the center of a circular hall, no longer elevated above others. The throne had been removed, replaced with a wide council table. Open to all, she wore a robe of soft violet and white, her crown resting on a stone pillar beside her. Untouched, Eli stood to her right, not as a ruler, not as a king, but as her equal. One of the nobles, a gray-skinned elder, stepped forward with a scroll in his hand. He read aloud, by law, you remain sovereign, queen. But today, we ask, are you still the same queen? The room held its breath. The queen stepped forward, her voice strong and steady. No, I am not the same, she said. I do not seek to rule from above, but walk beside those who build this empire. I will no longer silence the weak. She continued, I will listen, and I will protect. And those who follow me must do the same. A pause. Then a murmur of agreement spread, growing louder, steadier, until voices rose in support. Not cheers, but something deeper. Respect. Outside the court, changes were already happening. Laws once written in stone were being revised. Trade routes were opened to human colonies and smaller species once ignored. Slaves were released, not just from chains, but from names they were never allowed to choose. And at the center of it all stood Eli. He refused a title, refused luxury instead. He sat with engineers designing new schools, with farmers planting food for outposts. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, people listened. Even the youngest children pointed at him and said, that's the human the queen loves. But what shocked them most was how the queen changed. She laughed more now. She visited the outer villages herself. Sometimes arriving with no guards at all, she listened to music in the streets, danced during the new moon festival, and once was seen carrying a child on her shoulder. One elder wept upon seeing it, whispering, "We have not had a ruler who loved us in centuries." And in her chambers, late at night, she would sit with Eli beside a small table, sipping warm drinks. "I never thought I'd feel peace," she once said, looking out at the stars. "But here it is," he smiled. "Sometimes peace just needs permission." But not all were pleased. Across the stars, some old warlords refused to accept the new path. Messages came with threats, demands to return to true power. One said, "You have turned a warrior empire into a nursery," to which the queen replied, "Then let the children inherit a world worth living in." The empire didn't fall, as the old ones feared. It grew, not through fear, but through trust. Species who once hid from the queen's patrols now sent gifts. Small worlds requested alliances, not because of fear, but because they believed in the new queen who kneeled, one day, as the suns dipped into the horizon. The queen and Eli stood on the same balcony where it all began. The garden below was blooming. Trees once silent now bore blossoms of gold and blue. "You were right," she whispered, brushing her fingers along his. They just needed someone who believed they could bloom. He looked at her, warmth in his eyes. "So did you." She turned, resting her forehead against his chest, her voice barely a whisper. "You saved me without ever raising a weapon, and you made me a better man," he replied, holding her close. The wind carried the sound of distant children laughing, and the soft hum of peace filled the air in the distance. An old statue of a war queen was being taken down. In its place, a new sculpture was rising, two figures standing side by side. One tall and regal, the other small but steady. Together, not in chains, not in fear, but in hope. And so, across the stars, the story spread of an alien queen who once ruled with fire, and a human who didn't conquer her but saw her, and how that changed an empire forever, not with war, but with a hand held in trust, and a night that changed everything.